I spent 5 years caring for my sick husband, feeding him, bathing him, holding his hand through every appointment. I gave up everything for him. After he died, I sat in that lawyer's office expecting closure, but instead I heard a stranger's name. Sabrina, his affair. He left her everything, the house, the money, the life I built, but what he didn't know, he forgot to change one clause. My name is Jenna Whittaker, and I'm 35 years old. 5 days after the funeral, I sat in a lawyer's office that smelled like old paper and defeated expectations. The rain outside was a steady gray drizzle, matching the color of the carpet, the walls, and the suit of the man sitting across the polished mahogany desk from me. My husband, Ryan Keene, had been gone for a week, but the real goodbye, it turned out, was happening now. Ryan's lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson I'd never met before, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. He read the will with the emotional investment of a weather report predicting more of the same dreary overcast. I expected to hear my name, to hear some final acknowledgement of the 5 years I'd spent as his caregiver. The 5 years I'd traded my own life for, managing his pills, bathing him, sleeping to the constant, rhythmic hum of the oxygen machine by our bed. Instead, I heard a name I didn't recognize. To Sabrina Cole, Mr. Henderson read, his voice a monotone drone, I bequeath my primary residence, the beach condominium located at my vehicle, and the entirety of my savings, investment, and checking accounts. The list went on, a drumbeat of assets, each one a nail in the coffin of the life I thought I had. I must have looked confused because he paused. I'm sorry, who? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He slid a piece of paper across the table. On it was typed a name and an address in the city. The address of the woman who had just inherited my life. My name wasn't mentioned, not once. It was as if I'd never existed. Humiliation hit me first, a hot, sharp wave that washed over the grief. The sorrow would have to wait. My first thought, the only practical one I could form, was stunningly simple. I needed to figure out where I was going to sleep next month. The legal document on the desk in front of me had just made me homeless. I drove home, or to the house that was no longer mine, in a daze. The familiar turn into the driveway felt like a trespass. Inside, every object screamed his memory at me. There was the leather recliner where he spent his final months, its cushions still holding the faint indentation of his body. There was the kitchen counter I'd sanitized a dozen times a day, the gleaming surface a testament to my constant, vigilant care. The silence in the house was the worst part. For 5 years, my life had been set to a soundtrack of medical equipment. The beep of the heart monitor, the gentle whoosh of the ventilator, the low, steady hum of the oxygen concentrator. That hum was the backdrop to my exhaustion, the rhythm I fell asleep to every night. Its absence now was deafening, a hollow space that echoed with loss and now with betrayal. I found myself standing at the door of his office, a room I had rarely entered. It was his space, he'd always said. His sanctuary. My eyes landed on the steel filing cabinet against the far wall, 4 drawers, solid and impersonal. The top 3 were unlocked, filled with the mundane paperwork of a life, old tax returns, utility bills, car maintenance records, but the bottom drawer was locked. He'd always kept it locked. Sensitive work documents, he'd claimed whenever I'd asked. It was a small, solid piece of his life that had always been off-limits to me, a boundary I had respected. Now it just felt like a metaphor for our last few years together, a part of him that was sealed off, inaccessible. A cold purpose began to form through the fog of my shock. My first task was practical. I needed to find my own important papers, my birth certificate, my passport, my social security card. I needed to find something, anything, that proved I still existed. The initial shock started to wear off on the drive home, replaced by a cold, practical fear that coiled in my stomach. As I walked through the quiet rooms, the fear sharpened. I imagined Sabrina Cole, the woman from the will, walking through my front door. I saw her pausing in the foyer, her eyes scanning the family photos on the wall, photos of me and Ryan, of holidays with my mom and dad, of a life she was about to erase. In my mind, she walked into the kitchen, her hand trailing over the granite countertops I had picked out. I pictured her sleeping in my bed between the sheets I had just washed, using the coffee mugs I'd bought on a trip to the mountains years ago. I saw her looking out the very window I washed every week, the one that overlooked the garden I'd spent so much time tending. A raw, visceral anger began to bubble up. I started a mental checklist of what was truly mine, what I could take with me when the eviction notice finally came. There were a few pieces of furniture from my grandmother, my clothes, my collection of worn paperback books. It wasn't much, certainly not enough to build a new life from. My old job, the one that paid me $62,000 a year, was a distant memory. My resume now had a 5-year gap, a void that could only be filled with the word caregiver. Who would hire me now? I thought about the promises Ryan had made before he got sick, back when our life was full of plans. "We're a team, Jenna," he'd said. "I'll always take care of you." The words echoed in the silent house, feeling like ash in my mouth. They hadn't been promises. They had been hollow phrases, words he'd used to ensure his own comfort, to make sure I'd be there to fluff his pillows and crush his pills. I remembered all the times in that last year he had turned away from me in bed, shielding his phone screen from my view, his fingers tapping out messages I was never meant to see. I had told myself it was the illness, the pain, making him withdrawn and private. It was easier to believe that than to face the cold distance growing between us. It wasn't the pain, it was a secret. Her name was Sabrina. My passport wasn't in the desk drawer where I always kept it. A knot of panic tightened in my chest. I started searching his office with a growing sense of desperation, pulling open drawers, sifting through stacks of paper. Nothing. My frustration mounted until I found myself yanking on the handle of the locked bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. It didn't budge. The solid click of the lock felt like a personal insult, another part of his life I was shut out of. I turned to his closet, a place I hadn't looked through since he'd gotten too weak to dress himself. Behind a box of old, moth-eaten sweaters, I saw it, a small, gray metal safe. I still knew the combination. It was our anniversary. The irony of it, of using that date to unlock his secrets, was a bitter punch to the gut. My fingers fumbled with the dial, but it finally clicked open. Inside, there wasn't much. A few old watches, some stock certificates, and a single small key on a plain silver ring. It wasn't a house key. It had the distinct shape of a key for a filing cabinet. I walked back to the cabinet, the small piece of metal cold in my hand. I slid it into the lock of the bottom drawer. It turned smoothly. The drawer slid open with a quiet whoosh. It was mostly empty, a cavern of hollow space except for a single, dusty, navy blue binder lying flat on the bottom. The label on the spine was typed neatly, "Keen Family Trust." The date beneath it was from 7 years ago, long before his diagnosis, before our lives had been consumed by his illness. With trembling hands, I lifted it out and placed it on his desk. I opened it. The pages were filled with dense, legal language that made my head swim. But halfway through, I saw a paragraph highlighted in yellow, the color faded with age. It was a clause, a section about the duties and powers of the trustee. And one sentence stood out, written in plain, stubborn language. No changes to the beneficiaries or the distribution of assets could be made without the written, notarized consent of the named trustee. My eyes scanned down the page, searching for the name. It wasn't Ryan's. Below the clause, designated in clear black letters, was my name, Jenna Whittaker, trustee. He had gone to his lawyer and updated his will, but he'd forgotten about this. He'd forgotten to change the trust. In his rush to erase me, he'd made a mistake, and that mistake had just handed me a weapon. The first estate lawyer I found online with 5-star reviews was a woman named Olivia Pratt. I called her office first thing the next morning, my voice tight and strained as I explained my situation to her receptionist. She scheduled me for an appointment that afternoon. I walked into her office clutching the navy binder to my chest like a life raft in a stormy sea. Unlike Mr. Henderson's depressing, gray office, Olivia's was bright and modern with large windows that let in the afternoon light. It felt like a place where things got done, a place where problems were solved, not just announced. I sat across from her and told her the whole story. I spoke in a flat, emotionless voice, recounting the 5 years of care, the will reading, the shock of hearing the name Sabrina Cole. Olivia, an attorney who looked to be in her late 40s with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, listened without interruption. Her expression gave nothing away, and I felt a familiar sense of being dismissed, a feeling that my story of personal betrayal wasn't compelling enough to warrant a real fight. I was just another grieving widow with a grievance. Then I pushed the dusty binder across her sleek glass desk. I opened it to the highlighted page and pointed to the clause. "This," I said, my voice finally finding some strength. "He forgot about this?" She read it once, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she read it again, more slowly this time. A slow, knowing smile spread across her face. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen directed at me in days. "Mr. Keene was meticulous with his will," she said, looking up at me, her eyes sparkling with professional interest. "But he was sloppy with this. This," she tapped the page with her pen, "changes everything." For the first time since I'd heard Sabrina's name, a tiny flicker of something that wasn't despair ignited inside me. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was close. Olivia explained the situation to me in simple terms, cutting through all the confusing legal jargon that had made my head spin the night before. "Think of it like this," she said, leaning forward. "The will is like a letter to Santa Claus. It's a list of what Ryan wanted to happen. The trust, on the other hand, is the ironclad contract that actually controls the money and the property. And you, Jenna, hold the keys to the entire thing." She explained that Ryan's will could say he wanted to give every last penny to Sabrina, but the rules of the trust meant he needed my signature to actually move any of the assets. The will was a wish, the trust was the law. Without my consent, the house couldn't be sold. The bank accounts couldn't be transferred to a new owner. The car couldn't be re-registered in Sabrina's name. Nothing could move, nothing could be touched. "You are the gatekeeper," Olivia said, her voice firm and confident. "Nothing moves from this estate to that woman without your key, and you don't have to give it to her." My initial, desperate hope that the will was just some horrible mistake had been foolish. This was better. This wasn't a mistake I needed someone to fix. This was power I already held. Of course, her services came at a cost. The retainer was $5,000. I looked at my personal savings account on my phone. I had just over $6,000 to my name. It was almost everything I had left. It was a small, visible loss that represented years of careful saving. I didn't hesitate. I wrote the check, my hand steady. It felt good to be doing something, to be making a decision. It was the first decision I'd made purely for myself in 5 long years. Olivia Pratt didn't waste any time. Before I had even gotten back to my car, she was on the phone. Within hours, her office had drafted and sent official notices to every financial institution Ryan had ever used. The letters were clear and direct, informing them that all assets held under the Keene Family Trust were officially frozen, pending a full review by the trustee. She also sent a formal letter by courier to Mr. Henderson, the executor of the will, stating the same thing. The gate was officially closed. Her final piece of advice to me was simple and direct. "Do not contact Sabrina," she warned. "Do not answer her calls or respond to her texts. Let her come to you, and when she does, you say nothing. You just take a screenshot and forward it all to me. Let me be the bad guy." As I left her bright, sunny office and stepped back out into the gray, drizzly afternoon, the world looked different. The colors seemed a little sharper, the air a little fresher. It wasn't hope, not exactly. It was purpose. I drove home, and for the first time since the will reading, I didn't feel like a trespasser in my own house. I felt like a sentry, a guardian standing watch. My options had narrowed, but in a good way. The situation was no longer a messy, emotional tangle of grief and betrayal. It had been clarified, streamlined into a clear legal strategy. I wasn't the forgotten, grieving widow anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was the trustee. And I was in control. It took less than 48 hours for the first shot to be fired. My phone lit up with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, a text message appeared on the screen. "Who the hell are you and why is my money frozen?" It was signed with a single initial, S. Sabrina Cole, the sole heir, had entered the chat. Another text arrived just minutes later, more frantic this time. "Ryan wanted me to have this. He promised me, you're stealing from him, you're stealing from a dead man." The messages kept coming, a rapid-fire assault of confusion, then anger, then outright panic. She accused me of being a bitter, vindictive shrew. She threatened to call the police. She told me I had no idea who I was messing with. I sat on my sofa, the blue light of the phone illuminating my face in the dim room, and watched her digital meltdown. I followed Olivia's instructions to the letter. With steady hands, I took screenshots of every single message, documenting her escalating hysteria. I composed a new email to Olivia, attached the images, and wrote a single word in the subject line. Started, then I went back to my text messages. I thought about all the things I wanted to say to this woman who had been living a secret life with my husband while I was changing his bandages. I thought about the rage and the pain and the humiliation. And then I typed out a single, calm sentence just as the central premise of my new life demanded. "I will not be bullied out of my life." I hit send. Then, without waiting for a reply, I blocked her number. The silence that followed was a small, satisfying victory. The clash had begun. It wouldn't be a shouting match. It would be a war fought with legal notices and the quiet, immovable power of the word no. My progress in freezing the assets was a defensive victory, but it also created a new vulnerability. Sabrina didn't just disappear after I blocked her number. The siege began. She started calling from different numbers, burner phones or friends' phones, I assumed. I stopped answering any call I didn't recognize. The voicemails she left were a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Some were rambling and tearful, where she painted herself as the grieving, heartbroken partner, robbed of her future by a bitter, vengeful wife. In others, her voice was sharp and furious, filled with threats and insults. She was building a narrative, and I was the villain. One evening, there was a loud knock at the front door. My heart jumped into my throat. I crept to the window and peered through the blinds. A delivery driver was walking back to his car. On the porch was a large paper bag from my favorite Thai restaurant. I hadn't ordered anything. I cautiously brought it inside. Taped to one of the white containers was a small, handwritten note: "Enjoy the house while you can." The food went straight into the outside trash can. The psychological pressure was building, a slow, constant tightening in my chest. I started jumping at every sound: the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside the window. The house, which had once been my sanctuary, the place I had so carefully managed, now felt like a fortress under siege. I felt watched and judged, and I felt completely, utterly alone. This wasn't just about the money for her. I realized that now. It was about her claiming the life Ryan had promised her. It was about her taking my life. Just when the isolation felt like it was about to swallow me whole, my phone rang with a name I hadn't seen in a long time: my older sister, Diana Whittaker. We hadn't been close in years. My life had become a tiny, insulated world that consisted of only me, Ryan, and his illness. There hadn't been room for much else. "I heard what happened," she said, her voice devoid of judgment, filled only with a quiet concern that I hadn't realized I was starving for. "A friend of Mom's heard some gossip. I'm coming over." She didn't ask if it was okay, she just stated it as a fact. An hour later, she was at my door, a bottle of wine in one hand and 2 huge bags of Chinese takeout in the other. She walked in, kicked off her shoes, and started setting out plates on the coffee table. She didn't pepper me with questions or demand all the sordid details. She just sat with me on the couch while I ate, her solid, comforting presence filling the empty space in the room. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. Diana was practical, a force of nature. After we ate, she walked through the house, unplugging the landline phone from the wall. She went from room to room, closing the blinds. Let her scream into the void, Diana said, nodding at my phone, which was buzzing with another call from an unknown number. You have work to do. Her presence was a shield. The social pressure from Sabrina's campaign of harassment suddenly felt less potent with an ally in my corner. Someone was finally taking care of me. She helped me see that Sabrina's frantic attacks weren't a sign of strength. They were a sign of pure desperation. With Diana's encouragement, I decided it was time to face the rest of his secrets. I couldn't just defend, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. I needed to know the full scope of the life he had hidden from me. I started with the unlocked drawers of the filing cabinet, pulling out years of bank statements, trying to match them to the list of frozen accounts Olivia had sent me. That's when the first backfire of my initial assumption hit me. I had thought this was a recent affair, a product of his last desperate year. I was wrong. In a thick manila folder labeled simply medical, I found what I was looking for. Tucked inside, among the hospital copays and pharmacy receipts, were statements for a series of recurring wire transfers. They were meticulously labeled reimbursements, specialist care. But the money wasn't going to a doctor or a clinic. The transfers were being sent to a personal bank account. The payments had started 19 months ago, $6,200 one month, $4,800 the next. The amounts varied, but the cadence was regular, like clockwork. I pulled out the piece of paper Mr. Henderson had given me at the will reading, the one with Sabrina Cole's name and address. The recipient address for the wire transfers was a perfect match. He hadn't just been cheating on me, he had been funding her entire life with our money, and he'd been disguising it as his own medical expenses. He had used his illness, the very thing I had dedicated my life to managing, as a cover for his betrayal. The problem wasn't just a secret girlfriend. The problem was a carefully constructed, deliberately funded second life. The discovery of those payments changed the stakes completely. This was no longer just about a house or an inheritance. It was about the 5 years of my life I had sacrificed. While I was upstairs bathing him, changing his sheets, and carefully crushing his pills to mix with applesauce, he was downstairs on his laptop, electronically wiring thousands of our dollars to another woman. Every single act of care I had performed over those 19 months now felt like a bitter, twisted joke. He hadn't just betrayed me as a husband, he had exploited me as a caregiver. He had turned my love and my labor into a financial instrument to fund his affair. Diana saw the look on my face as I stared at the bank statement in my hand. She gently took the file from me and scanned the page. "Okay," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "Now it's a war." The humiliation I had felt in the lawyer's office was a pale, flimsy thing compared to this. This was a deep, calculated erasure of my worth, of my sacrifice. This was proof that my presence in his life had been one of pure utility. I took photos of every single statement and emailed them to Olivia. Her reply came back almost instantly, just 3 words: "This is excellent." This is leverage. My resolve, which had been wavering under Sabrina's siege, hardened into something unbreakable. I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was fighting to reclaim 5 years of my life. I was reclaiming my dignity. The medical folder was just the appetizer. I knew in my gut that the main course, the real heart of his deception, had to be in that locked bottom drawer. Diana, ever practical, went to the garage and returned holding a power drill. "There are no more secrets in this house," she declared, her eyes glinting with a righteous fire on my behalf. But instead of drilling the lock out, I remembered the small key from the safe. It felt more fitting, more symbolic, to use his own key against him, to turn his carefully guarded security into the instrument of his exposure. I retrieved it, and we stood before the filing cabinet together. I slid the key into the lock, and it opened with a quiet, final click. We pulled the drawer open. It contained more than just the Navy Trust binder. Lying on top was a crisp, folded deed. My hands shook as I opened it. It was for a beach condo in a town 2 hours up the coast, purchased 2 years ago. The sole owner was listed as Ryan Keene. Tucked underneath the deed was a thick stack of receipts from a high-end interior design firm. New furniture, new appliances, new linens, a whole new life bought and paid for that I knew nothing about. And beneath that, a stack of credit card statements for a card I never knew he had. The charges were a map of his secret world: lavish dinners for two, expensive jewelry from boutiques in the city, airline tickets with two names on the itinerary. This was the first hard, irrefutable proof. It wasn't just wire transfers anymore. This was a fully furnished, secret existence he had built while I was running his errands and scheduling his doctor's appointments. Seeing the deed to that beach condo was the moment the last bridge to my old life burned to the ground. Any lingering, sentimental shred of the man I thought I'd married, the sick man I'd pitied, the scared man I'd comforted vanished in the smoke. In his place stood a stranger, a meticulous, cruel man who had used his own illness as the perfect cover for a breathtakingly elaborate betrayal. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I felt a strange, chilling calm settle over me. The grief I'd been carrying, the sorrow for the man I'd lost, was finally completely gone. It was replaced by a clarity that was as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. In that moment, I committed to a new approach. I wasn't just going to stop Sabrina from getting his money. I was going to decide exactly where every single penny of it went. I was going to take the legacy he had planned with her and forge it into something entirely new, something of my own making. This was no longer about what was fair to me or about getting what I deserved. This was about imposing a consequence, a real, tangible consequence for his actions. I laid the deed out on the kitchen table, the paper smooth and damning under my fingertips. I looked at Diana, my voice steady and clear. "I'm selling it," I told her. "I'm selling his secret house." The next day, as if on cue, a registered letter arrived. The crisp white envelope felt heavy with menace. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of. Sabrina had hired a lawyer. His name was Mark Ellison, an attorney whose letterhead looked expensive and aggressive. The letter was a formal demand, stripped of all emotion and couched in threatening legal terms. I was to relinquish all control of the trust assets within 10 business days. If I failed to comply, they would file a lawsuit to contest my position as trustee and have me removed. It accused me of maliciously interfering with the final wishes of a dying man. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, painting me as a cold-hearted villain and Sabrina as the grieving, wronged party. The ticking element of my situation was no longer an abstract fear, it was now on the calendar. 10 days. The threat didn't scare me, it energized me. It was a formal declaration of war, and after what I'd found in the locked drawer, I was more than ready to fight. I took a picture of the letter and forwarded it to Olivia. My accompanying text was short. "Let them," I wrote. "We have a beach condo to sell." The letter was their move, their attempt to bully me into submission. My move was going to be much, much bigger. Olivia called me that afternoon, her voice all business. The threat of a lawsuit forced a pivot in our strategy. "We can't just sit back and be reactive anymore, Jenna," she said. "If we let them file first, they control the narrative. We need to act first. We need to control the story." Her plan was bold, leaning into the very power they were trying to strip from me. She proposed that I use my authority as trustee to begin liquidating assets immediately and move the funds before any lawsuit could complicate things. The beach condo was the perfect place to start. "As the trustee, you have a legal duty to manage the estate prudently," she explained in her calm, simple way. "Selling an asset to consolidate funds and protect the estate's value is a standard, defensible part of that duty. No judge will question it." This was a significant pivot from defense to offense. I was no longer just the gatekeeper, standing guard and saying no. I was the manager, the administrator, making active decisions and taking decisive action. I was taking control. The goal was no longer just to survive this, to walk away with my home and some semblance of security. The goal was to win. "Find me a realtor," I told her, my voice filled with a resolve that surprised even me. "The best one you've got. I want that condo sold yesterday." Before I could sign any paperwork to sell the condo, Olivia said I needed to gather all the relevant documents. The deed, the property tax records, any mortgage information. That's what led me to Ryan's laptop. It sat on his desk, a sleek silver rectangle covered in a fine layer of dust. It was password protected, of course. I tried my birthday. Access denied. I tried his birthday. Access denied. Then, on a hunch, I looked back at the secret credit card statements. I found a charge from a bakery for a custom birthday cake. The date was April 12th. I typed in Sabrina0412. The laptop unlocked. The betrayal was so casual, so mundane, it almost took my breath away. On his clean desktop was a folder innocently labeled Projects. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked it open. Inside was another folder, this one titled Next Chapter. I opened it. It was full of emails, a long chain between Ryan and a local real estate agent. My blood ran cold as I read them. They detailed his plan, meticulous and cold-blooded, to sell our family home as soon as possible after he passed away. In one email, he described it as unloading a property with some difficult memories. He had already had the house appraised. He was discussing staging options. He was planning to completely erase me, to sell the very ground under my feet and scatter the ashes of our 20 years together. This was the major truth, the final, unforgivable secret that flipped my plan on its head. It was no longer enough to redirect his money. I had to use it to build something he would have actively despised. I stared at the line about selling the house as soon as possible until the words blurred. The laptop's fan hummed, a small machine sound that reminded me of nights spent listening for beeps and alarms. I closed the lid and everything went quiet. That quiet didn't hurt me anymore, it sharpened me. I called Olivia. She picked up on the second ring. I found more, I said. My voice sounded calm, even to me. He planned to sell this house the minute he died. I don't want to just protect what's here. I want everything on the table, every account. Every piece of property, every investment. If my name touches it through the trust, I want to know where it is and how fast we can move it. She didn't try to slow me down. I'll get a full list started, she said. There will be things you didn't even know existed. Good, I said. I'm done hoping for scraps. I'm done waiting for permission. I looked around the office that had always been his space. Dust sparkled in the shaft of light near the window. It felt like standing in a room set for a party I'd never been invited to. There's not going to be a settlement, I added. No quiet deal. She doesn't get a cent because he wrote a wish list. He chose her. I'm choosing the terms. I hung up and stood very still, palms pressed to the desk. The wood was smooth from years of his elbows rubbing along the edge. I pulled my hands back like I'd burned them. I went into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. The glass was one of a set we'd picked together back when we meant something. I took a long drink and set it down. The sound of it meeting the counter felt like a gavel. This was the line I couldn't uncross. I wasn't just going to block a transfer. I was going to reroute his entire final act. The man who had erased me would bankroll the life I chose. If that made me the villain in anyone else's story, I could live with that. I was done being a ghost in my own home. Diana sat at the table that night while I read the emails out loud, my voice flat. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she pinched the bridge of her nose, then looked at me in that steady way she has. You know what people will say, she said softly. They'll paint you as cold, they'll say you're bitter. They'll call you the wife who wouldn't let the poor, tragic love story have a happy ending. I speared a piece of leftover chicken with my fork. My hand shook only a little. They already decided who I am, I said. They decided that in the grocery store when they turned their carts away from me. They decided it when the will named a stranger and people whispered that I must have been awful to him. You'll lose friends, she warned. The couple's friends for sure. I know, I swallowed the bite. It tasted like cardboard. If they couldn't see me while I cooked his meals and changed his sheets, they'll never see me now. I'm not auditioning for a part that doesn't exist. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm here. That simple sentence was a balm. I thought about the few people who might call. My phone had already gone quiet except for unknown numbers and Olivia's updates. I pictured Sarah's face, the pitying tilt to her head. I could hear the line, "This isn't you," but it was me. It was the part of me I'd ignored for 5 years, the one that believed I deserved to take up space. I went to the hallway and looked at the framed photo of our wedding. We were laughing. I touched the glass. "You made me invisible," I whispered to the man in the picture. Then I took the frame down and set it in a box with others I wasn't ready to throw away. I wasn't ready to trash the past, but I wasn't going to let it steer me anymore. The cost of this decision was already on my skin, a hardness that felt like a new layer. I accepted it. I would be the woman some people warned their friends about. I would be the example in a whispered story about what happens when a wife doesn't let it go. I'd pay that price to look at myself in the mirror and see someone who refused to be erased. The next morning, I sat with my laptop at the kitchen table. I typed "women's shelter near me" into the search bar and clicked through the results. Most of the websites looked tired, old photos, donation links that had that pleading tone I knew well from late-night fundraisers. One name stood out because the page was so bare, a small shelter with a short mission statement and a photo of a cramped kitchen. I called the number. "Safe Haven Women's Shelter," a woman said. Her voice was warm and worn at the edges. "My name is Jenna," I said. "I'd like to talk to someone about making a large donation." There was a pause, like she was making sure she'd heard me right. "This is Nora. I'm the director. Can you come by today?" The beach condo sold in a week. The realtor Olivia found moved like wind photos listing "offer done." When the offer came in at $842,000, I stared at the number on my phone. It didn't feel like a win, it felt like a tool. The money went into the trust account with my name on it. When the confirmation hit my inbox, I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for a month. Nora met me in her small office, which was really just a room off the kitchen in a narrow building that smelled like coffee and bleach. There were crayon drawings on a bulletin board and a basket of mismatched socks by the door. A woman in a faded hoodie stirred a pot of soup on the stove and gave me a nod. "I don't want my name on this," I told Nora after we sat. "Not the big shiny kind. I want the work to be front and center. But I do want something else." She leaned forward, curious and cautious. People probably made promises to her all the time. "I want to help you buy a bigger building," I said. "A place with light and space and a kitchen that isn't a hallway. I want to add beds and a room where women can sit and just breathe, and I want to call it Harbor House." Nora's eyes filled, then she blinked hard and smiled. "Harbor House," she repeated like she was testing how the words fit in her mouth. "I like that. I'm going to put his name on a plaque," I said, "not as a tribute, as a reminder. People think a legacy is something you write and everyone else has to read, but sometimes it gets edited." She held my gaze like she understood more than I was saying. "We could change a lot of lives with that," she said. "We could keep the lights on without begging for a while. We could say yes more than we say no." "Then let's start," I said. I felt a strange peace settle into my bones. This wasn't anger anymore, it was direction. "Draw up what you need, let's make a list, let's move fast." 10 days after the letter with the threat, a courier knocked on my door. He had tired eyes and a winter hat pulled low. "Are you Jenna Whittaker?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me a thick envelope and had me sign his screen with a plastic stylus that didn't work unless you pressed too hard. The papers were heavy in my hands. The words were dressed up, but the story was simple. Sabrina wanted the money and she wanted a judge to punish me for standing in her way. The suit said I was abusing my role. It said I was twisting a technicality to keep her from Ryan's dying wish. It painted him as a good man with a broken body and me as a greedy woman with a cold heart. I carried the envelope to the kitchen and put it on the table. The edges left a faint paper smell in the air, like a new book. I ran my finger along the top. I didn't cry, I didn't throw it, I didn't even open it right away. Instead, I texted Olivia. "They filed, papers delivered," she called within minutes. "I figured this was coming," she said. "I'll send a messenger to pick them up. You don't need to read every word." "What does it change?" I asked. It makes it public, she said. People will talk, but the trust is clear. We'll respond. We'll set a hearing. We're prepared. After I hung up, I looked at my phone. A notification lit up from a neighborhood group app. A post with my address blurred out but not enough and a caption about messy estate drama. I turned off the phone and set it face down. Later, I stood at the sink, hands in hot water, scrubbing a pan that didn't really need scrubbing. The metal squeaked under the sponge. The house was so quiet I could hear leaves brushing the windows outside. The quiet didn't scare me anymore, it steadied me. I thought about the women in Nora's kitchen, stirring soup. I thought about beds that would be made up with fresh sheets. I thought about a front door that would swing open to a woman holding a small bag and trying not to cry. The papers on my table weren't a verdict. They were just the next step in a long line of steps. They were Sabrina's voice, turned up loud, trying to rattle me. I dried my hands, picked up the envelope, and slid it into a folder for Olivia. Then I took a deep breath that reached all the way to the bottom of my lungs. Let them talk, I said to the empty room. I'm busy. A week later, my phone flashed Sarah's name. My stomach dipped the way it does on a fast elevator. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I swiped. Hey, I said, trying to sound normal. She sighed, a long, careful breath. Jenna, I don't even know what to say. Her voice was soft, padded with concern, the kind people use right before they try to talk you out of yourself. I heard about the lawsuit. Of course you did, I said. I went to the sink and turned off the dripping faucet as if the silence would help. Look, I know you're hurting, she said, but Ryan was sick, you know he wasn't himself at the end. Maybe the will, she trailed off. Don't you think this is, I don't know, cruel? I stared at the tile. A small hairline crack ran through the grout like a thin river. He didn't just change a will, Sarah, I said. He bought a condo. He sent her money labeled as medical care for 19 months. She made a sound that was half sigh, half groan. I don't want the details, she said quickly, as if the truth might stain her. I keep thinking about how you held his hand in the hospital. You were an angel, Jen, but sometimes people do crazy things when they're dying. He started long before the end, I said. My voice was even. And the money, please, she said, cutting me off. Please don't do this to yourself, don't drag this out. I'm worried you're becoming someone I don't recognize. There it was, the old kindness weaponized. Maybe I'm just not invisible anymore, I said. She went quiet. I could hear a car blinker on her end, the click 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 of a turn. This isn't you, she said finally, like a verdict. I can't be part of this. The line clicked dead. I held the phone to my ear a few seconds longer, listening to the flat nothing. My tea on the counter had gone cold. I took a sip anyway and winced. My chest felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped a part of me and left the edges raw. Losing Sarah didn't surprise me. It still hurt. It was like walking through my own house and finding blank spaces where furniture used to be, shapes outlined in dust. I leaned my hip against the counter and watched a sunbeam creep across the floor. People preferred the thing that hurt less to believe. The sick man, the sainted wife, the tragic love story. I had said yes to that easy story for years. I wasn't going to anymore. By the end of that week, my life was a rumor in my own town. I went to the grocery store and could feel the air change when I turned down an aisle, the hush, the quick sideways glances, the sudden interest in canned beans. A woman I used to chat with at the bakery gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Bless your heart," in a way that meant the opposite. Outside, 2 teenagers chalked flowers on the sidewalk. I stepped around them like I was the one who shouldn't be seen. At the pharmacy, the clerk asked if I wanted to round up my total to donate to a charity. I said yes, and she paused, then looked at the name on my card. "Oh," she said, as if that one syllable could carry all the town's opinions. On the neighborhood app, someone posted a blurry photo of my mailbox. The caption said something like, "Sad situation on Maple Street." Anyone know the details? The comments were full of guesses and moral lessons. I scrolled until I felt sick and shut it off. Diana watched me pace the kitchen, her arms crossed. "We could leak the statements," she said, her jaw set. "Post the condo deed, tell the whole story, let people choke on the facts." Olivia told me a different story. We win in the courtroom, she said over the phone, firm and calm. Not in the court of public opinion. Let them gossip. Let them make up endings to a book they haven't read. You stay quiet, you stay steady. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, to sit with the lies and not fight back. Silence is a heavy coat, it weighs on your shoulders. I wore it to the coffee shop and took it off only when I got home and set it on a chair beside my bag like I could leave it there. Still, I was human. I cried once, alone in the car, where the sound of my own sobs bounced off the windshield and came back at me. Then I wiped my face with a napkin from the glove box and went inside. I folded laundry. I watered the plants. I let the town's story slide past me like rain off a roof. Every night I texted Nora for updates about the shelter. She sent photos of a kid's bed with a new quilt, a pantry shelf lined with cereal boxes, a woman's hand holding a key. Those images were a rope I gripped with both hands as the current of gossip tried to pull me under. A few days after the lawsuit papers landed on my table, Olivia called again. I could hear city noise faintly in the background, horns, a voice on a loudspeaker. I need to give you a boring but important update, she said. Our case is strong, the trust is clear, but this process costs money. How much money? I asked. I braced my hand on the counter. It depends on how messy they make it, she said. Their lawyer's whole plan is to slow walk everything. He'll file pointless requests, he'll ask for delays, he wants to wear you down. He's hoping you'll run out of funds and agree to a deal that gives Sabrina something, anything. I looked at the folder of receipts for paint samples and hardware for Harbor House. I thought of the check I'd already written as a first payment on a new building, money that meant a real kitchen and more beds. I've already committed a big chunk, I said. I don't regret it. I wouldn't ask you to, she said. Just know that every time I file a response, it costs you. Every hour my team spends, it costs you. I'll be efficient. I always am, but their strategy isn't about truth, it's about time. I laughed, a short sound that surprised me. Time is the one thing he ate from me like it was nothing, I said. I'm not giving them more. I'll keep it tight, she promised. But you may need to sell something else sooner than you planned. We can talk about investments we can liquidate. I stared at the outline of the houseplant's shadow on the wall. If I have to sell the car, I'll sell the car, I said. I'll ride a bus, I'll walk. She paused. You shouldn't have to, she said. But I hear you. After we hung up, the pressure settled like humidity before a storm. I stood very still and listened to the house. The old boards creaked in their familiar way. A neighbor's lawn mower droned. For a second, I let my head fall back and stared at the ceiling. I could feel his absence like a missing tooth my tongue couldn't stop searching for. Then I pushed off the counter and made a list. I started keeping lists the year he got sick. It helped me feel like my days belonged to me. I wrote court costs, shelter payment 2, sell what next. Then I wrote win quickly. It sounded like a fantasy. It felt like a plan. The following week, Olivia's team dug deeper into every corner of the trust. She called it a full review. I pictured a group of people in neat shirts, sipping coffee while they clicked through my past. They asked me for account statements, tax documents, anything with numbers. I stood on a chair in the hall closet pulling down boxes and sneezed at the dust that puffed up into the air. One of Olivia's assistants, a woman named Tessa with a voice like warm tea, became my regular contact. Don't worry if something's messy, she said. Just bring us what you have. They found an investment account I'd never heard of sitting with a firm whose name meant nothing to me. It's big, Tessa said, skimming without drama. Over $1 million, it's where the money for the condo came from. It's where a lot of the transfers to Sabrina started. I stood at the kitchen window looking at the maple tree and felt the ground shift under my feet. I thought that money was from before we were married, I said. Ryan always said he had investments from his 20s. We're tracing where the money came from, she said. That helps us show what's actually part of the trust. Sometimes those things get mixed up. Tracing, I repeated. The word felt like following a string through a maze. A day later, Tessa called again. This might sound left field, she said, but did you receive an inheritance about 6 years ago? I wiped my hands on a dish towel. From my grandmother, I said, saying grandma made my throat ache. It wasn't a lot, 50,000 I think. She left each of us a little something. Do you have the paperwork? Tessa asked. A letter, a check stub, anything that shows the amount. I pictured the attic low ceiling, a single bare bulb, the smell of cardboard. I can look, I said. Please do, she said. It's important. After we hung up, I pulled down the attic ladder and climbed into the heat. The air up there was stale and dusty, full of old years. I pushed aside Christmas ornaments and a box of Ryan's college textbooks. My fingers dragged over rough cardboard until I found the file I'd labeled with my grandmother's name in my neat, hopeful handwriting. Inside was a copy of the check, the typed letter from the lawyer who handled her will, and a simple list. Her ring to my mom, a recipe box to my cousin, $50,000 to me. I sat cross-legged on the plywood floor, holding the letter like it might dissolve if I breathed too hard. My grandmother's name in black ink looked like a small light in all that dimness. I carried the file downstairs, laid it on the kitchen table, and took photos with my phone. Tessa replied fast with a thank you and a promise to review. Then the house was quiet again. I made a fresh pot of coffee, the smell strong and clean, and stood very still while it dripped. Something in me shivered like a thread pulled tight. I didn't know why Tessa's question made my skin feel prickly. I only knew the past wasn't done with me yet. Tessa called back within the hour. I could tell from the way she said my name that this wasn't just another update. Jenna, she said softly, we traced that big account. The first deposit is the exact amount of your grandmother's check. Same date, same bank. It went in under both your names like a holding account. Then within a week it was moved into a new account under one name. She paused. Ryan's? I leaned on the table, my palm flat against the cool wood. So the million started with your 50,000, she said. It grew a lot over the years. The paperwork lists it as part of the trust, but the seed was yours. I'm looking at a copy of the endorsement. It's your signature on the first deposit, and then everything after is under him. I closed my eyes. I remembered the day the check came in the mail. I'd been in leggings and one of Ryan's old t-shirts, my hair in a mess at the top of my head. He'd been freshly diagnosed and scared. I was scared too. He'd folded me into a hug, the kind that made me feel like I was safe in a house I didn't know was burning down. Let me handle this, he'd said. I'll invest it for us, I'll make it grow. I'd signed where he pointed and kissed his cheek. Tessa cleared her throat gently. I'm sorry, she said. I know this is a lot. I opened my eyes and stared at the coffee cup in front of me. A ring of dark brown stained the bottom. I could smell the faint bitter scent of old coffee grounds. It is, I said, my voice didn't shake. Thank you for telling me. Send everything to Olivia. Already did, she said. We'll organize it for court. After we hung up, I picked up the letter from my grandmother again. I ran a finger over her name like it was a seam I could split, and she might step out of the paper to sit at my table and make everything make sense. She had worked the same job at a fabric store for 30 years and saved quietly, folding bills into her bank account like careful stitches. That money was supposed to be a soft landing. He had turned it into a springboard for his second life. I felt something in me go very still, like a lake when the wind stops. He hadn't just used our money. He'd taken my last piece of family and folded it into a story that cut me out. The condo, the dinners, the flights, all of it had my grandmother's name at the base, buried under his. I slid the letter back into the folder, closed it like a book I was done with, and set it aside. That night, the house felt too full of papers and too empty of breath. I pulled a box from the hall closet and carried it to the living room. The lid had a label I'd written years ago in thick black marker, photos. I settled onto the rug and lifted out the album on top. The plastic cover squeaked under my fingers. The pages smelled like dust and old paper and a faint sweetness that might have been from a candle years ago. I flipped slowly. There we were on a beach in Florida, both of us squinting into the sun. I remembered the feel of grit between my toes, the way he'd laughed when a seagull stole part of his sandwich. My mouth pulled into a smile and then it faded as a question slid in, slick and cold. Was he texting her then, legs tucked under a towel, phone hidden in his hand? I turned the page. There we were at my cousin's wedding, his arm hooked around my waist, my head tipped against his shoulder. I could hear the clink of glasses and the band warming up. Was he planning condo furniture while I danced to old songs? I tried to find one photo I could keep untouched, even just one where the edges were clean, a Halloween party. A hike, Thanksgiving at Mom and Dad's with my father carving the turkey and my mother insisting we take leftovers. Every picture had his smile and behind it a shadow. I felt like I was standing in front of a row of windows, each one showing a scene I used to trust and watching them darken one by one. I pulled a loose snapshot from the bottom of the box. We were on the couch with a bowl of popcorn between us and an ugly quilt over our legs. My head was thrown back. I looked silly and happy. I touched the image of my own face with the tip of my finger, careful like it might bruise. The grief that rose wasn't for him. It was for the version of me who didn't count pills on a kitchen scale, who didn't get shushed by a nurse's light voice outside a hospital room, who signed a check because love sounded a lot like trust. I slid the photos back into their plastic sleeves. The sound was small and soft, page against page. I packed the albums into the box and taped it shut. On the lid I wrote in neat letters, "Do not open yet." I carried it to the hall and set it beside the door. There was nothing left to salvage tonight. The last safe story I could tell myself, that parts of him were true, that pieces were clean, was gone. The man I'd cared for had been a role he wore next to me while he built a different life miles away. I sat on the floor until the rug's pattern pressed into my skin and the room got dark. Then I pushed myself up, my knees cracking like old wood, and turned on a lamp. The light wasn't kind. It showed dust on the bookshelf and a cobweb in the corner. It showed me myself, standing in a room that had held 10,000 small kindnesses and the long, slow cruelty of being erased. I squared my shoulders. If he had taught me anything, it was how to live with a machine's hum in my ear and not break. I could live with this, too. I called Olivia the next morning. The sun was bright and sharp through the kitchen window, cutting across the table like a line. "I don't want to just defend this," I said when she picked up. "I want to go on offense." "I figured you might," she said. I could hear the scratch of her pen. "Tell me what you're thinking." "I want to file our own claim," I said, "not only to keep my role but to make them answer for the money that started with my grandmother. I want the judge to order that whole account back to where it belongs, and I want more for what he did, for what she took." Olivia was quiet for a second. "It's aggressive," she said finally. "It could make the judge think this is about revenge." "It is about consequence," I said. I stared at the streak of sunlight on the table until it blurred. They didn't just try to take what was left. They built it with what I brought. "Then we do it," she said. "We'll file a counterclaim. We'll ask for the value of that portfolio plus damages, but I need you steady. No social media, no responding to bait. You let the paperwork speak." "Good," I said. "I'm tired of talking." After we hung up, I moved around the house like someone doing a fire drill. I pulled out folders and labeled them with thick black marker: condo, bank, inheritance. I printed emails and highlighted dates and amounts. I drank too much coffee and forgot to eat until my hands shook. When I finally made a sandwich, the bread tasted like paper, but I chewed and swallowed and kept going. 2 weeks to court, Olivia texted that night. 2 weeks feels like a long time when you're waiting for news you don't want, and like no time at all when you're building a case with your own hands. I started putting my phone in a drawer and only taking it out when I needed it. I slept with the bedroom window cracked even when the night was cold so I could hear the branches move. Clean anger has a sound. To me, it sounded like wind through leaves. Every morning, I went for a walk around the block and nodded at people who didn't nod back. I let their eyes slide off me and kept moving. Every afternoon, I drove to Harbor House and walked through the empty rooms with Nora, measuring spaces with my steps, picturing beds and soft lamps, imagining a shelf with books that don't bruise when you drop them on your foot. We talked about paint colors and door locks and the kind of doorbell that doesn't make you jump out of your skin. At night, I sat at the kitchen table and read until my eyes stung. I made notes in the margins. I underlined. I stuck little yellow flags on the pages. When my neck hurt, I rolled my shoulders and kept going. This was the life I was building, quiet, relentless, with a spine made of paper and ink and proof. The night before the hearing, the house felt enormous and hollow, like a shell. Diana came over with 2 cardboard boxes and a roll of tape. "Let's pack some of his stuff," she said, trying to make her voice light. "Get your space back." We worked in the bedroom first. She held open a box while I folded shirts that still smelled like the laundry soap we used when I cared about which scent he liked. I tossed in socks and belts and a few ties I remembered straightening for him before work parties. The sound of the tape ripping was sharp and ugly. In the office, I stacked old notebooks, cords to devices I couldn't name, and a set of cufflinks shaped like tiny anchors. I turned them over in my hand. They were heavier than they looked. I placed them in a small jewelry box and shut the lid. When we were almost done, Diana tugged a photo album from the bottom shelf of the bookcase. It was bound in red leather, the kind you buy when you think you're making a life you'll want to show off. She flipped it open and let out a soft laugh. "Look how young we were," she said, tapping a picture. It was from a holiday party. We were wearing sweaters we thought were funny, my cheeks flushed, his arm around my waist. We looked happy, genuinely happy. The room where the picture had been taken came back to me, the smell of cinnamon, the radio playing old songs, the feel of his warm hand at the small of my back. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. For a moment, the weight of it all rolled over me like a wave I couldn't dive under. Even if I won tomorrow, what did I get? A pile of papers with my name in the right place. A building with lamps and beds and clean sheets. Those were real. They were good. But they didn't rewind time. They didn't give me back the woman in that photo who believed her life wasn't a lie waiting to be read out loud in a courtroom. Diana slid the album onto my lap. I looked down and touched the glossy surface of the photo. My finger left a smear. I wiped it away with my sleeve, like cleaning it could clean the past. It couldn't. The soft thud of my heart in my chest felt tired, like it had been carrying a bag too heavy for too long. "I don't know what the point is," I said. The words came out flat, honest. "I mean, I know what I'm doing. I know it matters. But I lost those years. I lost the person I thought I married. He wrote a story for me where I wasn't even on the page." Diana sat beside me and leaned her shoulder against mine. "You were always there," she said. "He doesn't get to decide the final draft." I let out a breath that felt like I'd been holding it all day. The room hummed with silence. It's funny how silence can be so loud. It crawled up the walls and settled into the corners. I thought about the nervous laughter at the will reading, the tight smiles at the grocery store, the way my friends had drifted to the edges like I had a stain that might rub off. I closed the album and set it beside me. We finished packing in quiet. When Diana left, she hugged me hard and said, "Call me if you can't sleep." I promised I would and didn't. I stood by the bedroom window and looked out at the street. The porch light caught a moth, its wings beating in a frantic halo around the bulb. The rest of the block was still. Somewhere a dog barked once and then went quiet. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass. The fight in the morning felt like a finish line and the start of another race I didn't remember signing up for. I climbed into bed and lay on my back, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen drifted down the hall, steady and low, a soft machine sound that used to mean everything. It made me think of the nights when I slept to the hiss of oxygen, counting breaths until dawn, keeping watch. I didn't know what the judge would say. I didn't know if the town would ever see me for more than the rumor they liked to pass around. I only knew I'd walk into that room with my own name in my mouth, ready to say it out loud. And if the victory felt hollow in some places, I'd fill those places with something real. I turned on my side, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and finally let my eyes close. The picture in my lap pressed a thumb on the bruise I always carried and tried not to touch. It wasn't just the sweater party or the fake reindeer ears or the glow of twinkle lights. It was the role I'd played without knowing it. In that photo, I was sunlight in someone else's window. In our marriage, I was the helper, the fixer, the woman who could be relied on to handle the hard parts so he could chase whatever future he wanted. When he got sick, my role got a title, caregiver, and a schedule and a soundtrack of machines. But even before the diagnosis, something in me had been trained to move to the edges, to make room, to make it easier for everyone else. The lawsuit and the gossip only rubbed salt in that old feeling. People loved a simple story. I was the obstacle, the bitter wife in the way of his true love. The town pressed me into that mold and called it truth. Diana sat beside me without saying anything for a while. She didn't try to cheer me up. I was grateful. When words came, they were slow. "He didn't just leave, he pushed me off the page," I said. My voice sounded like it had been dragged across gravel. "He made it so I was never even there." She put her hand on my knee, firm and warm. "You were there," she said, "every day, every hard thing." That's the part nobody wants to look at because it doesn't fit the fairy tale. I closed my eyes and let that sink in. The fear at the center of me, the one that whispered I was only valuable when I made myself small, didn't vanish. It sat there, stubborn as ever, but above it, something steadier spread out like a plank floor under my feet. The truth didn't change because people preferred a different ending. My name belonged in my own story. I was done being a background character in a house I'd scrubbed clean. I set the album aside and rubbed my thumb against the ridge where the cover met the spine. It left a faint, tacky sound. "Tomorrow I walk in and say my name," I told Diana. "Out loud." She nodded like that was more than enough. After Diana left, the house closed in around me. It felt like one of those snow globes people shake at Christmas, except the flakes were bits of paper with my worst thoughts written on them. The living room was dark. I didn't turn on the lamps. I sat on the edge of the couch and listened to the refrigerator hum and a car pass by outside, tires buzzing on wet pavement. The quiet was a heavy blanket I couldn't kick off. I thought about picking up my phone and texting Olivia. We could offer a deal. We could stop the bleeding. Let Sabrina have some money. Let the town stop staring. I pictured the words. Make a settlement? My thumb hovered over the screen like it was balancing on the edge of a cliff. I was so tired of being the strong one, the right one, the reasonable one. Tired of reading bank statements with my jaw clenched and my eyes burning. Tired of seeing myself through other people's eyes, a monster wearing the wrong face. For a minute, I let myself believe their story because it was easier than fighting it. Maybe I'd become someone hard and cruel. Maybe I was proving them right. I stood up because sitting felt like drowning. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back a few inches. The streetlight washed the sidewalk in a pale circle. A moth battered itself against the glass like it didn't understand the rules of doors. I pressed my palm to the cool pane and breathed. The breath fogged the glass and then cleared. I imagined calling Mom and Dad, hearing Dad's slow, careful words, hearing Mom's sigh. I didn't want pity. I wanted a reason that didn't move when the wind blew. If I was a monster in their story, then I'd better be the kind of monster that built something gentle with her claws. I let the curtain fall. I didn't text Olivia. I put the phone in the drawer. I told myself I could sleep. I didn't believe it. I lay down anyway on top of the covers, shoes still on, like I might need to run. The hum in the house rolled on, steady as a tide, and I counted those shallow waves until the numbers were just sounds. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a second I thought about ignoring it, then I reached for it and winced at the light. It was a text from Nora. A photo filled the screen, an old storefront with a new door, light pouring out in a warm square onto the sidewalk. Inside I could see 3 women with paint rollers, their hair tied up in messy buns, one of them with a smear of yellow across her cheek. The wall behind them was a bright, cheerful shade that made the whole room look like it had swallowed the sun. The message said, "The first residents of Harbor House wanted to say thank you. You gave them a safe place to land." She added a little heart, not the cartoon kind, but the kind that looked hand-drawn and a bit crooked human. I stared at it until my eyes stung. In the doorway of that building, someone had set a small table with a pitcher of water and paper cups. A pair of kids' sneakers sat neatly by the baseboard, as if a child had already claimed one small corner of the world. I could almost hear the brush of rollers against the wall, the soft laughter of women who were choosing a color and a future at the same time. This was why I was walking into that courtroom. Not to prove I wasn't a villain to people who liked their stories simple, not to punish ghosts, for them, for the woman in the photo who had paint in her hair and keys in her pocket. For the woman who hadn't cried because she'd run out of tears and was ready to sleep without planning her next escape. For the kid whose shoes were lined up like a promise. My anger shifted into something cleaner, like a river after rain when the mud settles and the water runs clear. It wasn't a wildfire anymore, it was a steady burn. I texted Nora back, "Tell them they don't owe me anything. Just keep painting, I'm rooting for them." Then I set an alarm, brushed my teeth in the dark, and packed my bag for morning notes, pen, one picture of Harbor House printed on paper. I slipped the photo into my folder, a talisman, and lay down again. Sleep found me like a hand on my forehead, light but sure. The courthouse smelled like old wood and coffee that had been sitting on the warmer too long. The courtroom itself was smaller than I'd expected. A narrow room with hard benches and a ceiling fan that turned lazily even though the air didn't move. Fluorescent lights hummed. I sat at the table with Olivia, the folder of my life tidy and heavy in front of me. My hands were folded on top of it, fingers laced, nails short and clean. I could feel my pulse in my wrists, quick but not wild. Sabrina sat at the other table with Mark Ellison. She wore a black dress and a scarf that looked expensive in that quiet, showy way. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue in the exact same rhythm every few seconds, like a metronome. When she looked up, she scanned the room for an audience and found one. Judge Karen Brooks took her seat. She was in her 60s, gray hair pulled back, glasses halfway down her nose. She looked at us over the frames like a teacher who'd seen every trick before. She didn't smile, she didn't scowl, she just waited. Mark Ellison stood first. His voice had that smooth, practiced tone that fills a space and leaves no room for air. He talked about love, about promises whispered between two people in the shadow of death, about the kindness of honoring a dying wish. He used Ryan's full name again and again, folding it like a warm blanket around his story. He called me the trustee instead of my name, as if that could shrink me back into a role and away from a person. I listened without looking down. I kept my eyes on the judge's face, on the white clock high on the wall, on Olivia's steady pen. The cheap fabric of the bench behind me scratched my shoulder. The tissue Sabrina held crumpled and smoothed, crumpled and smoothed. When Mark finished, Olivia stood. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't dress her words up. "Your Honor," she said, and the two words sounded like a door opening. She placed the trust binder on the table the way you set down a tool you know how to use. "We're here to talk about facts." I breathed in, slow and even. I wasn't here to ask, I was here to say my name and to watch the truth do the work it was built to do. Olivia set the blue binder down like a steady heartbeat. "Your Honor," she said, "this is the trust Ryan Keene created 7 years ago, page 23. She flipped it open, slid a copy toward the judge, and pointed to the highlighted line. "Nothing in this trust can be changed without the trustee's written yes. The trustee is Jenna Whittaker. She never gave that yes." She didn't linger. She pulled a folder from her briefcase and laid out pages in a neat stack. "These are bank statements. The line items marked reimbursements specialist care are not payments to a doctor. They're wires to Sabrina Cole at her home address." She handed up copies. The judge scanned them, her eyes moving in small, calm shifts. Next came the deed. Olivia held it up so the seal caught the light. A beach condo purchased 2 years ago. Sole owner Ryan Keene. She placed glossy photos beside it, couches, lamps, a king-sized bed with a throw blanket folded just so. Receipts followed: sofa, bar stools, a set of wine glasses, a bill from an airline with 2 names. My stomach clenched, but I kept my face still. "And this," Olivia said more softly, almost like she was lowering her voice for a reason, "is where the money came from." She laid out the letter with my grandmother's name. The copy of the check, the deposit slip with both our names, then the transfer into a new account under one name only, Ryan's. This account grew over time. It's the same account used to buy the condo and send money to Miss Cole. The seed money was Miss Whittaker's inheritance. There was a hush, the kind that feels like a room breathing in. Mark Ellison shifted in his chair. Sabrina dabbed her eyes. Olivia finished without flourish. "This isn't about feelings," she said. "It's about control and funding. The trust controls the assets." The trustee said no, and much of what Mr. Keene tried to give away was not his alone to give. The judge looked from the binder to the papers. She didn't react, not really. She just adjusted her glasses, the small, careful motion of someone adding up columns in her head. I kept my hands folded and breathed through my nose, in and out, in and out. Sabrina went to the stand with a small tremble that read well from the benches. She took the oath, sat, and gripped the tissue like a prop. Mark Ellison walked her through a story where love had the lead role and facts tripped over their lines. She talked about hospital nights and whispers and the first time Ryan told her he wanted a future. She said "we" like it had legal weight. When Olivia stood to cross, she carried only a yellow legal pad and a pen. "Miss Cole," she said, "when Mr. Keene sent you money, what did he say those transfers were for?" Sabrina blinked, mascara perfect even in tears. "He said it was to help with expenses while he was sick." Olivia nodded. "Did you know they were labeled as reimbursements for medical care?" "I didn't read the labels," Sabrina said. "He handled the banking." Olivia set the pen down like she was setting a boundary. "Did you ever ask where the money came from?" Sabrina paused too long. "He told me it was his." "Are you aware that the condo you visited on weekends was purchased from an account that began with Miss Whittaker's inheritance?" Olivia's tone stayed gentle, which made the words hit harder. Sabrina's chin lifted. "I didn't know about any inheritance." "Did you ever wonder how a man who was not working because of illness could afford a second home, new furniture, airline tickets, and thousands of dollars a month to you?" Olivia's voice didn't rise. It dried out the air. Sabrina's mouth pinched. "He said he had investments." Olivia let the silence sit long enough to make everyone hear it. "Investments his wife's money helped build," she said quietly. "No further questions." Judge Brooks turned to me. "Miss Whittaker," she said, "do you wish to speak?" I stood. My knees didn't wobble. "Yes, Your Honor." I kept my eyes on her. "Ryan's will said what he wanted. But the trust he made said how things actually work. He never got my consent to change anything." I swallowed once. "And for years he moved money in ways that used me, my time, my work, and my grandmother's gift." I turned my head just enough to look at Sabrina. "He picked you," I said evenly, "but he built your future with my past. I'm simply reclaiming it." I sat down and folded my hands again. Olivia's fingers brushed the back of my hand, a small, wordless nod. The clock on the wall ticked. Judge Brooks didn't leave the bench. She didn't need to. She took a moment, then spoke in a tone that made the whole room hold still. "Miss Whittaker is the trustee. The trust document is clear. No changes without her written consent." "None was given." She glanced at Sabrina. "A will can express a wish. It cannot override the rules of a trust that holds the assets." She tapped the binder. "In this case, the trust controls the house, the accounts, and any property held under it. That includes the proceeds from the condo." Sabrina made a sound, soft and broken. Mark touched her elbow. "As to the funds," Judge Brooks continued, "the paper trail shows that Mr. Keene moved money under the label of medical care that went to Miss Cole's account, and that a large investment account began with Miss Whittaker's inheritance. These facts do not support Miss Cole's claim." She turned fully toward Sabrina. "Miss Cole, your grief may be real, but grief does not entitle you to money that was not lawfully yours to receive in this way." Your lawsuit is dismissed. My lungs remembered how to work in long, slow pulls. The judge wasn't finished. On the counterclaim, she said, looking down at the file, there is strong evidence that Mr. Keene built that investment account with Miss Whittaker's inheritance. Any future use of those funds will be directed by the trustee. Additionally, Miss Cole is ordered to cover Miss Whittaker's fees associated with this suit. She looked at the clerk. Total is $19,400. The gavel's soft rap was just sound on wood, but it felt like a door shutting on a storm. People stood. The benches creaked. Sabrina remained seated, her eyes bright and shining, but not with tears, with heat. In the hallway, echoes bounced off tile and wood and shoes. Sabrina cut through the small crowd and stopped in front of me, too close. The scarf at her throat smelled like some sharp flower that blooms once and dies. You took everything, she said, low and shaking. He wanted me to have a life. I slid a small white card from my pocket and held it between two fingers. The letters were clean and spare. He picked you, it read. I set the terms. I placed it in her hand and stepped around her. The doors to the wide steps swung open and the cool air hit my face like a rinse. I didn't look back. Months later, my mornings begin with the sound of the ocean instead of machines. I bought a small cottage in a town where no one recognizes my face. The porch is only big enough for one chair and a plant that refuses to die. I drink coffee in a chipped mug and pull my sweater tight around my shoulders when the wind slips through. The air tastes like salt and clean beginnings. I sold the old house. I let the rooms empty of their ghosts one box at a time. I liquidated what was left of the investments, including the portfolio that had started with my grandmother's neat, careful life. I signed the last set of papers with a steady hand. Each signature felt like a stitch closing a long, jagged cut. I kept one photo. It sits in a plain frame on a shelf by the window. It's the one of me and Ryan where we look so happy I have to blink away both the sting and the lie. I keep it not for him, but for the woman with the open smile and the messy bun who didn't know what she could live through. I tell her thank you when I dust. Nora texts me photos from Harbor House every week. A kitchen with a bulletin board full of chore charts drawn in colorful markers. A hallway where someone taped up a paper chain, each link a promise, job interview, first rent, new school shoes. A plaque by the front door that reads, "This home was made possible by the Keene Fund." His last name sits there like a lesson more than a tribute. People see it and ask, who was he? Nora always answers, someone who helped. That's enough for me. Sometimes I drive to the edge of town and watch the water slap and pull, slap and pull. The rhythm teaches my body something new. There's a hardness in me now, not brittle, just bone deep. I don't apologize for it. I notice when it cracks a little, when laughter finds me, when my sister splashes paint on my forearm by mistake and we both laugh too long. I'm learning to trust that too. On a morning that smells like rain and coffee, I tuck my legs under me, sip the last of my drink and listen. The waves keep their promise, in and out, in and out. I smile at the horizon. The tide takes what it must and brings back what it can. I am free. Betrayal can feel like the end of your story, but it can also be the start of a better one. If you've reclaimed your power after being written off, share it in the comments. And if you want more stories of justice and resilience, subscribe.